Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 799. Kidnapping a Goddess 2. Chapter 799. Kidnapping a Goddess 2. Ah fuck. I'm already starting to regret this decision. I had made a lot of poor decisions in the past. I was aware that I was no genius, and sometimes I got ahead of myself. This was something that I was very aware of, and at this very moment, I felt this more than ever. Your goddess. I'm kidnapping her. Staring at the figures before me, each one radiating more power than the last, my stomach twisted with unease. Yes, this is a very dumb decision. However, it was also the only decision that I could take. Panthea was batshit crazy, and if things carried on as I predicted they would, then it wouldn't be long until I found myself locked in a certain basement without any arms or legs. Fucking. I had eased the squeeze on the goddess's injury, but the moment I saw someone approach a little too closely, I decided to add more power to the grip. Perhaps because she was in front of her followers, but the moment I pressed on her injury, she didn't make a single sound. Her face just changed to show the pain that she was experiencing. Seeing this, I frowned, but seeing how the seats and the living saint had yet to move from their spot, it looked like this was enough. Yeah, there's no need to push things. Why are you doing this? A cold voice echoed from the other side of the room. It came from the living saint, his expression no longer as friendly as it had been before. I could only smile wryly. You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. Let's just say that the goddess and I know each other and we're having a sort of disagreement. Disagreement? The living saint turned his attention towards Panthea, seemingly trying to read her expression. But the moment he did, I pressed harder onto her injury, causing her face to contort. Let her go at once. A voice boomed shortly after, a tremendous pressure bursting into the room. Turning my head, I caught sight of the same burly man from before, his glare sharp enough to cut through stone. The hood had fallen back, revealing a bald head with hair only along the sides, and a thick, muscular face covered in rough stubble that shadowed his jaw. I should have killed you when I had the chance. I knew from the start that you weren't good news. I was right. I nearly rolled my eyes. He knew shit. Yes, I did come unannounced and even got an audience with the goddess, but in no way do I look like a bad guy. Absolutely not. Hick. Okay, maybe I did. Still, she was the true bad guy. You should let her go before the relationship between us becomes damaged beyond repair. I can assure you that if you let go of the goddess, we'll let you walk away. Despite the burly man's words, the living saint still tried to keep things civil. I can assure you that I won't harm you at all. The same goes for the people around. If you don't believe us, we can sign some sort of contract. How is that for you? Sorry. I shook my head, as if a contract that good could exist. Although the living saint appeared kind on the surface, I knew that was only a facade. The red orb swirling around his body made it clear. Behind that calm expression was a desire to tear me apart piece by piece. Although I appreciate your offer, this isn't what I'm looking for. The goddess has what I'm looking for. I turned towards Panthea. Isn't that right? I squeezed her shoulder harder, causing her to flinch. You! How dare you! The pressure coming from her followers in front of me grew even more fierce. Enough to make me feel suffocated. Even so, when thinking about the pressure that I had felt from Delilah in the past or Exahurls, it was still lacking. I'd survived worse, and as such wasn't scared. Turning my attention towards the followers, I lowered my voice. I'll say this once, and only once. If you wish for nothing to happen to her, then allow me to pass. If you so much as do something to the people that came with me, then you can start worshipping another god or goddess because this one will stop existing from this very moment forward. I knew that it was time for me to take things extremely seriously, and taking into account that I was the one with the most leverage, I planned on using it to the fullest, pulling the goddess's body ahead of me. What are you doing? The living saint's face twitched, taking a step closer to me. Do you understand what you're doing? This is the place where the goddess is safest and can heal her injuries. If you take her out now, you're going to risk her health. Is that so? I gave the living saint a second glance before looking around me. So this place is supposed to help her heal from her wounds. This place resides right above the beacon. The scope of this place is to use the prayers from the followers to directly heal her using the runes that are implanted on the floor. If she moves out of this place, then there's a very good chance that her injuries will worsen. I implore you, don't bring the goddess out of this place. For a moment, I almost believed his words. However, seeing the red that was still brewing within his body, and only growing, I knew that there was something else to his words. My eyes started to squint. The more I looked at the living saint, the more off he felt to me. I couldn't quite explain what it was, but the sensation was enough for me not to want to be anywhere near him. I'll keep that in mind. I pushed the goddess forward, causing the faces of the followers to contort. I could tell that they wanted to lunge at me and kill me on the spot, but with the goddess in my hands, they were completely helpless. The only thing they could do was step aside as I dragged the goddess toward the door. Stopping just before it, the living saint's voice echoed once more. Are you sure you want to do this? I didn't look back, smiling to myself and activating Lament of Lies. Don't worry. I'll cast an illusion over her body so that nobody realizes that she's gone. I reached for the door and pulled it open. Clank. Outside the cathedral. How long do you think he'll be inside for? It shouldn't be that long. Anaz replied to Aoife, taking out a couple of salas and tossing them over a certain counter as he received several drinks in return. He handed them to the others, each giving him a brief thank you, before returning to the conversation. The last time he had a conversation with Anaz stopped there, omitting the term goddess because they were in a public space. Drinks in hand, they all moved towards a more secluded place with fewer people. It didn't take more than an hour, I don't think. Maybe even less. Do you think he's going to be fine? Evelyn asked, taking a sip of her drink as her eyes narrowed a little. She then added, I don't know why, but I'm getting pretty bad vibes. I feel like something wrong will happen for some reason. This bit. Why are you fucking jinxing it? For a moment, it seemed like Kira was about to hit Evelyn, but she stopped herself at the last second, letting out a shaky breath as she rubbed a hand over her face. Right? I'll hold myself back. Nothing is happening. I'm just being a little paranoid. At the same time, she smirked while looking at the others. Imagine he comes back with the goddess saying shit like, I've kidnapped her. Kek. She started to laugh, bringing a few smiles from the others. Evelyn was the only one who didn't smile, narrowing her eyes at Kira. Weren't you just complaining about jinxing stuff? Did you see me hit you? That's besides the point. No, it's not. It is. But it isn't. Also, come on. As if Julian is capable of kidnapping a goddess. Be realistic. You never know. Evelyn's voice grew a little higher. That being said, at this point, she was just arguing for the sake of arguing, as if Julian would kidnap a goddess. He wasn't that much of a lunatic. Anyway, putting that aside, are you guys not getting any bones? I bought myself a terror-ranked one. I was hoping to find a disaster-ranked bone, but those are pretty rare. They mentioned there's an auction coming up, but I'm not sure if I want to go. I also heard about the auction. Maybe we should go. Evelyn agreed. She still had yet to fill all of her bone slots. With the prices here being so low, she thought it would be great if she purchased a disaster-ranked bone. The two conversed like this with Anaz and enjoining from time to time. The only ones who remained relatively quiet were Aoife and Leon. The two lost in their own thoughts. And eventually, finally found you. A man walked towards them, his hand over a woman's shoulder, as everyone froze on the spot, looking at him at a complete loss. They could tell from his voice that it was Julian. But that woman, who is that? The one to ask the question was Aoife. Her eyes locked onto the figure next to Julian as she felt a bad premonition. Please let me be wrong. I don't know why he's got a woman in his grasp, but let me hope that it's nothing serious. God, if you exist, please heed my prayer. She wasn't the only one. Leon, Kira, and Evelyn also felt the same bad premonition. Still, they wanted to believe in Julian. Surely, this. Julian looked at the woman next to him and waved his hand at them. There's no need to be concerned. We're safe. A moment later, he deactivated Lament of Lies, revealing the figure in his grasp. Her skin was as pale as the dim sun above, and the faint flicker of flames in her eyes trembled weakly, on the verge of fading out. With a simple smile, he introduced her to everyone. Meet Panthea, the goddess of light. You can say that she's an old acquaintance of mine. So kidnapped her on the way? We should also prepare a ship and leave? There's no real rush to be honest, but it would be best if we did. Chapter 800. Kidnapping a Goddess 3. The faces that everyone was giving me were anything but kind. In fact, I could even see genuine hatred in some of them. But where was the shock? The disbelief? I just arrived with a goddess in hand. Did they really believe me that easily? It can also be that they're thinking that I'm joking and they're angry at the thoughtless joke. That makes sense. I'm actually not joking. This really is the go. We know. We're not that stupid. We can easily tell with just a look. Do you take me for a fool? I'm not the brightest, but I can tell that you're not lying. I turned towards Leon. He was staring at me in disappointment, holding his hand to his face. What sort of reactions were these? Eventually, I turned towards Inaz and Anne. The two were staring at the goddess with gaping mouths. Finally, normal reactions. I could tell from Inaz's reaction that he was well aware of the fact that I wasn't lying, and the goddess was indeed in my grasp. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a goldfish struggling for air, and after watching him fumble for words, I decided to give him an explanation. I was trying to negotiate with her for some stuff, but the deal didn't go through. Looking at Panthea, her face was even paler, and before I knew it, she had passed out in my grasp, most likely from the pain. And has turned even more speechless, his gaze falling back onto me. He looked surprisingly calm despite the actions that I took against the goddess that he worshipped. And so you decided to kidnap her? Aoife's voice sounded from her side, her brows furrowed tightly as she looked at me. Staring at her, I nodded. Yes, pretty much. The situation was actually a lot more complicated than that. However, now wasn't exactly the time for me to tell them everything. The Seats and the Living Saint are all aware of the situation. Given how the goddess is in my grasp, they can't do anything, but I think it's best if we leave. I turned my attention towards and as she raised her brow, looking back at me in surprise. What? What do you want from me? I just offered her a smile, but the moment I did, she shook her head. Absolutely not. Look, you're the only one with a ship. I wouldn't be asking if I had any other choice, but right now, you're the only person I can rely on to get us out of here. That's not the problem. Her voice rose. You're essentially a wanted fugitive at this moment. If I were to help you out, I'd essentially be turning everyone around her into my enemy. What will happen to me after I leave you? What about my crew? I'm sorry, but I absolutely cannot accept. Even if I owe you. Her words were reasonable. Indeed, helping me was the same as making an enemy of everyone around her, but there was something that she forgot to take into account. You're a pirate. You're already an enemy of everyone present. And turned speechless at my retort. She wanted to argue, but found Inez stopping her. To be honest, I want to help you. However, like I said, this would put her and her crew in a lot of danger. Even if let's say we manage to get out of this, it'll mean that she can never set foot in the Crimson Sea again. While it's also true that she's wanted at the moment, there's still a tacit understanding between her and those from the Temple of Light. If she burns all her bridges, then Inaz's face turned complicated, especially when he looked at the goddess of light. Well, I scratched the side of my face. I honestly didn't want to force them to come with me. I already caused them quite a bit of trouble by doing what I did, and in reality, the truth of the matter was that they were already implicated by my actions. Still, it wasn't like I was going to just ask them for help for nothing. I understand your current concerns. However, even if you don't wish to be implicated, you're already implicated to some extent. At the very least, you won't be having a good time here. Inaz's expression soured a little. I could tell that he was proud of the house that he had managed to buy. Seeing him like this, I felt even worse, but there really wasn't too much time. I don't know if you've already figured it out, but I come from the world outside. World outside. Both Inaz and Anne struggled to keep up. Are you saying that you come from another domain? Or do you mean? Inaz was the first to realize, his breathing coming to a brief pause. The shock didn't last long as he pinched his chin. Now that I think about it, I've always suspected something considering the items that you managed to bring with you back then. Yes. I tapped my ring and took out several goods that could only be found in the world outside the mirror dimension. Primarily vegetables. We indeed come from the world outside, and I turned my attention towards Aoife, who raised her brow as if to understand my intention. Pointed at her. I know that the two of you might not be able to come back here, but why don't you instead come to the world outside? What? She's a princess. And Inez gave the expected reaction upon hearing about Aoife's status, their eyes widening at her presence. Aoife just raised her hand. I am, but it's complicated. She then turned towards me. Are you even sure they can come? Their bodies are adapted to this place. I don't know if they'll be okay outside. I think they should be fine. Inaz and Anne weren't ancient beings who were imprisoned in the mirror dimension. They were most likely descendants of people who came from the outer world and came to the mirror dimension in order to establish a force. The two of them could very easily go out. It could take a bit for their bodies to adjust, but they were both strong enough not to mind it. The problem was that leaving the mirror dimension wasn't easy. Mirror cracks weren't common, and the nearest one was far from here. On top of that, they were heavily guarded by the empires from the outer world, making entry almost impossible. Thankfully, this wasn't an issue for us. I'm sure Aoife can help the two of you find a nice place to stay. The same goes for your crew. I know that both of you are happy here, but the outside world is much better compared to this place. I was honestly trying my best to convince the two of them, not just because I needed their help, but because they were both capable, and was incredibly powerful, and Anaz was a great assistant helper. Anaz and An both stood in silence, their brows furrowed as they tried to think about the situation. I wanted to urge the two of them to hurry up, but didn't rush them. It should be fine. I could feel several dozen eyes locked in our direction. Of course, because of my grip over the goddess, none of them reacted, but the moment the opportunity presented itself, I was certain they were going to do something. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a blade, doing everything I could to keep my balance. Eventually, fine, I'll help. I think it's about time that I leave this place. And relented. Seeing her like this, Anaz had no choice but to follow along with her. I guess I also don't have a choice. I clenched my fist. Great! And turned around, motioning me to follow along. Let's go. I'll lead you to my ship. I'm starting to feel uncomfortable here, holding onto Panthea's passed-out body. I looked at the others before following her along. Let's go. We might actually die if we don't hurry. Splash. Splash. Crimson waves crashed against the city's port. The docks eerily empty as a lone ship pulled away, drifting farther into the depths of the Crimson Sea. A couple of figures stood by the edge of the port, staring at the moving ship with cold eyes. What should we do? A deep voice drifted through the air, and the man turned his head toward the figure standing at the center. The living saint's gaze flickered, settling on the distant ship as it moved farther away. Gathered around him were the seats of Salas. Despite looking for any openings in order to snatch the goddess back, the perpetrator had been extremely careful, not leaving them any chance to do so. To add insult to injury, every moment he felt something odd, he'd squeeze onto her injury and cause her to flinch. The seats and the living saint were all left helpless, unable to do a single thing, and watch as their own goddess was brought into a boat and moved away. You're whole. Don't do anything just yet. The living saint interrupted the burly man. With his gaze fixed on the distant boat, his usually warm voice turned cold as his eyes turned slightly hazy. We will act the moment he leaves the domain. Once we're certain that the goddess is away and that there's no one around, we'll eliminate them in one go. We can't let them figure out that the goddess is injured. That would cause the other domains to attack us. Huh? What? A few let out startled sounds. But what about the goddess? If we attack her, then that would put her life at risk. We can't afford to. The goddess is dying. The living saint cut through the voice, his back turning away from them as he moved back towards the cathedral. She's told me so explicitly. The faces of the seats changed dramatically. The goddess was injured? It was no wonder the saint didn't do anything rash. If such news spread, it would cause the entire place to fall into an uproar. Those from the other domains would also, without a doubt, become bolder and attack them. That's why we have to attack them when no one is around. This is to ensure that nobody finds out about the goddess's injury. But what if we hurt her? That would. It's time. The living saint stopped, his eyes flickering once more as everyone stopped speaking. It's time for her to leave this world. I've already talked this through with her. Following her death, I'll become the new god. A smile crept on the living saint's lips. I'll become this generation's god of light. Chapter 801. Kidnapping a Goddess. 4. The journey to reach the other side of the Crimson Sea from the remnant south was fairly long. Having already experienced the journey in the past, I was mentally prepared for the long journey, and as such, I immediately made myself comfortable the moment the ship started to move. Leon, Aoife, and Evelyn also seemed to be okay. But there was one exception. York. A figure hunched over the sides of the ship, gripping them tightly as vomit flew out from her mouth. It was a rather comical sight to see, especially with all the curses that followed each puke that came out of her mouth. Bloody fucking ship. Get me out of this fucking shit. York. I paid no attention to her retching and got to work, dragging Panthea into a separate room before fixing my eyes on her. She was clearly weakened, but with her power, it wouldn't have been surprising if she managed to escape the moment I let my guard down. Clank. Closing the door behind us, there were only the two of us present. Her face was pale, her hair a tangled mess. Her lips were dry and cracked, and the flames that once burned in her eyes now flickered weakly, barely holding on. Where is Noelle? I asked for the sake of asking. I didn't expect her to give me an immediate answer, but He's actually not far from here. He should be locked up in Veltrus's domain. Huh. I looked at the goddess in stupor. Did she just answer my question? No, it might be a lie. Heh. I can see that you don't believe me. However, I'm not lying. He's locked up there since Veltrus is the only one capable of creating chains that can keep him properly sealed. I was once again rendered speechless. Is she really telling the truth? But why was she telling me the truth? What was it with the sudden turn of events? I'm offended. Did you really think I wouldn't tell you the answer? Panthea offered me a smile, albeit a weak one. You should know better than anyone just how much I like you. If you need something, of course I'll tell you. You want to see Noel, right? He's located in Veltrus's territory, near Clora's territory. I opened my mouth, trying to get a few words out, but staring at her, I didn't know what to say. I was still struggling to believe her words. How could I? She was batshit crazy. Ha! It looks like you still don't believe me. Panthea smiled once more. This time it looked more out of amusement than anything else. In the midst of my confusion, her body began to emit a faint glow. Instinctively, I reached for her injury, but my hand slipped straight through her, as if her body had turned to air. A powerful glow took over the room shortly after, blinding me. Ugh! I tried to react, but it was too late. By the time I opened my eyes again, Panthea stood before me. Her lips pulled into the same amused smile as before. Would you look at this? I'm free. Her finger pressed forward, lifting my chin slightly as my entire body froze. What just happened? Don't tell me you actually thought you could keep me in your grasp, right? Hee hee. Panthea giggled, bringing her hand to her mouth. Although I would like that very much, I'm afraid that it's just not possible. You're not yet strong enough to accomplish that, even if you're containing my injury. A heavy pressure bore down on the surroundings as the goddess spoke. However, at the same time, as I stared at her, I felt that something was off. It doesn't look like she's angry at me for what I've done. I am a little offended about what you've done, but I did need to take a little breather from that place. You gave me the right excuse. Panthea giggled again, the flames flickering in her eyes as she looked at me. I can see your confusion, Emmett. I won't deny it. I allowed myself to be kidnapped by you, mainly because I wanted to be with you a little longer, and also because there's something else that I'm trying to achieve. Her gaze slowly lifted, turning towards the distance. I've been passive for too long. A lot of people within my domain have grown a little greedy. If I'm not wrong, they might even try to kill me the moment you leave my domain. Honestly, I wasn't surprised by her words. It's the living saint, isn't it? Panthea merely offered me a smile in response. She seemed a lot calmer now than she was before. Some people are just not satisfied with what they have. Despite everything that I've given them, they want more. It's a pity considering how much they've devoted to me, but this is just how human nature is. You just can't be satisfied unless you have the thing you so desire. Her eyes fell on me once more as she spoke the final words, causing my back to shudder as the flames in her eyes flickered. I didn't move, nor did I make a sound. My mind churned in every possible direction, scrambling for a way to escape the situation I'd found myself in. She seems calmer now, but I don't know what she might do later. Even though it looks like she allowed her to be kidnapped, I'm sure she's mad about my betrayal. What should I do? Should I do the same thing? Would that even work? I started to feel desperate. This situation, it was clearly not good. From the looks of things, the goddess was a lot stronger than I had previously anticipated. It seemed like fighting her was impossible. Then, don't worry. I'm not going to harm you or the people that are here. Panthea's voice shook me out of my thoughts, prompting me to look at her a little differently. You're not. No, I'm not. In fact, I won't be staying here much longer. I only wanted to find an excuse to leave and monitor the situation with my domain carefully. But aren't you a goddess? Why can't you just leave? It's not that simple, the goddess replied, brushing a strand of her silky blonde hair behind her ear. As a goddess, I'm bound to the people within my domain. Most won't notice it, but those with enough power will. The moment I leave the Ashen Spire, they'll sense it instantly through the connection we share. Still, you're a goddess. Even if you do decide to leave, what can they do to stop you? I'm not the same as I was in the past. Panthea looked at me deeply. My injuries are a lot more severe than you might think. As of right now, I'm not much stronger than the living saint. My brow rose. She's weakened by this much? I'm going to take this chance to see the situation within my domain properly. Now that we're a distance away from the beacon and church, it should be much harder for them to detect me. This will give me enough time to prepare accordingly. Lifting my head with her finger once more, she got a good look at me before her body started to fade. You're not exactly the same Emmett that I love. You're him, but you're also not him. It looks like your memories have yet to fully recover. I'll wait until that moment before coming back to you. My lip twitched upon hearing her words. Suddenly, I didn't want to regain my memories. But just as her body was about to fade completely, she left a few more parting words. Given how your memories are lacking, I'd like to remind you of something. Don't underestimate the 5 of us. We're not as weak as you think we are. Just like that, God Hunter, haha. I did previously say that Clara has died. But is that really the case? That girl is even more scheming than I am. Huh. Panthea disappeared before I knew it. No, wait. I looked around the room, trying to see any traces of her. However, she was completely gone. Regardless of how hard I tried to sense her, she seemed to have disappeared completely. What did she mean by that? Suddenly, I started to have a bad feeling. If her words were true, then was something happening to Delilah? I bit my lips, taking a couple of breaths to calm myself down. No, let's not fall for her words like that. Delilah is incredibly strong. I'm sure that even if Clara is not dead, she's still not able to beat Delilah. Although, I suddenly thought about my current situation with Panthea, about how she had played me right into her hand, and how she used me to get what she wanted. I also got what I wanted, but this has been her goal from the start. But was her crazy act real or fake? I wasn't so sure anymore. That being said, there was no doubt in my mind that she certainly had an obsession with me. I'd still like to keep some distance from her, but I know for sure that I'll be seeing her soon. My stomach churned at the thought, but there was something more troublesome that I had to deal with at the moment. I thought back to the words that Panthea had told me, and I covered my forehead. If what she's saying is true, then the moment we step outside her domain, the Church of Light will come after us without hesitation. They might already have us locked and are just waiting for us to leave. I bit my lips, turning to reach for the door and heading directly towards the upper deck where Anne and the others were located. Yuk! Fucking! Yuk! Ignoring the puking Kira, I confronted and directly. We might need to make a slight change to our course. Huh! And blinked her eyes, the confusion clear in her eyes. Before she could mutter out her confusion, I spoke. Head for the Clara domain. That's where we'll head next. There was a certain somebody that I needed to meet. A certain someone that I hoped was still there. Thinking about Panthea's words, I started to have a bad premonition. I really hope she was lying. Chapter 802. Integrating Domain 1. The Clara domain, Land of Elements, sat right on top of the Land of Light, stretching across what was once known as Russia. Amongst all the territories, it was what was considered to be the largest, with Veltrus's domain nestled right in between the Land of Light and the Land of Elements. Mongolia, that was where Veltrus's domain resided. As opposed to Panthea or Clara's domain, Veltrus's domain was a lot smaller. It covered most of what used to be Mongolia. Is this where you're supposed to go? Originally, I hadn't specified to them where we needed to go. The plan was to get to the other side of the remnant south and find a way to escape the influence of those from the Temple of Light. Things had changed now. With Panthea's information, I now knew where I had to go. The goal is to reach the Land of Fire. For that to happen, we must first pass the Land of Elements. Honestly, the name sounded weird. Land of Fire, Land of Light, Land of Elements. They weren't exactly the best sounding and original names. In fact, those weren't their true name at all. They were just named as such to make it easier. Land of Fire? Anne's brows furrowed tightly, her expression turning a little strange. That piqued my curiosity. What's wrong? No, nothing. I'm just surprised you want to go there. Why? Because there's hardly anything there. It's all desert. Anaz interjected from the side. Besides one city, I don't think there's much that you can find in the Land of Fire. That's good then. It made searching for Noel a lot easier for me. Good. Anaz tilted his head, obviously confused. I began to explain to him, I'm looking for someone. They are in the Land of Fire. If the scope of search is small, then it makes things easier for me. Ah, that makes sense. But, suddenly thinking of something, Anaz paused, his hand tucking against his chin. He then looked at and, now that I think about it, hasn't there been some news about there being a second son in the Land of Fire? Oh yeah, and thoughtfully nodded, as if also suddenly recalling. It's happened quite recently, right? The second son thing? But I thought it was just a rumor. I don't think it's true. Probably. Anaz agreed. Hearing the discussion going on between the two of them, I raised my brow. Second son? What sort of rumor was this? By the way, as if noticing something, Anaz turned to look at me, his eyes drifting around me in confusion. Where is the goddess? Weren't you? Oh, that. I scratched the back of my head, forcing a bitter smile. Long story short, she's gone. The deck turned silent. Anaz and looked at me speechlessly. But before they could voice out their opinions, I was quick to reassure them. Actually, you can say that I didn't really kidnap her. The two of us agreed to do this for specific reasons. Now that we've achieved our goal, she's left. That being said, it's very likely that those from the church will come for us once we leave the land of light. The two turned even more speechless. If looks could strangle, they'd have probably both strangled me by now. I coughed. Don't worry about that. I think we're going to be fine. I'll think of something. Either way, the journey is long, so we have time. I turned around before the two could say anything, rushing away as fast as possible. Yuka! Help! Everyone came to learn of the situation rather quickly. It didn't take long for everyone on the ship to turn against me. But what could I say? This wasn't something that I could have controlled. In the end, given the nature of the situation, the only thing I could do was lock myself in my own room and sit down on the bed. Oof! As the waves crashed against the hull, the boat creaked softly, rocking with the rhythm of the sea. It felt a little nauseating, but I was somewhat used to it. This wasn't my first time on a ship. In all fairness, it's also not the first time for everyone else. We did come to the remnant south the same way. There's so much to do. The past few months had been rather hectic, from the engagement to the goodbye, and everything that happened in between. I still barely had any time to process the entire situation. This was probably the last moment I'd get to truly be at peace. I was certain that things would become rather hectic quite soon, with little time for me to rest. In that regard, I planned to make full use of the time at my disposal. Tier 8. This was where I was currently at. While this was certainly a leap from the strength I previously held, it wasn't entirely mine. This was something that had been achieved by Julian and not me. As a result, many things were disrupted. The main source of power was curse magic, and the integrated domain that I currently held was a curse-based one. This won't do. The entire situation had messed up my previous plans. Still, the situation wasn't irreversible. Closing my eyes, the world faded into darkness. Within that void, the first thing I saw was a faintly glowing ring resting atop a black altar. Drawn to it, I stepped forward, my footsteps echoing softly as I reached out toward the ring. I felt a sudden wave of weakness the moment I touched the ring. For a moment, I almost had the urge to drop it on the floor, but just barely managed to contain myself. This should be Julian's domain. Once someone reached the 8th tier, they were required to merge their domain with reality itself by shattering it and creating some sort of vessel to contain the broken domain. In Julian's case, he integrated his domain in the form of a ring. And, zero crack, I planned on destroying the ring. Technically, it shouldn't be possible to destroy, but since this isn't mine to begin with, there's a certain rejection. I think I can do it. Clenching it tightly, I felt the surroundings tremble. A sharp pain pierced deep into my mind, but I ignored it, tightening my hold on the ring. As my grip strengthened, thin cracks began to spread across its surface, and the world around me started to tremble violently in response. The pain in my head sharpened, pulsing so intensely it nearly tore a sound from my throat. But I forced myself to stay silent, channeling every ounce of focus onto the ring before me. Zero crack. Zero crack. Thin purple tendrils seeped out from the ring, twisting and writhing through the air as the cracks along its surface spread wider with each passing second. The surroundings shook even more fiercely, the pain in my mind hard to ignore. And eventually, bang, the ring shattered in my mind. Irk! My eyes flared open at the same time, blood spewing out from my mouth. Yuk! It just wouldn't stop. The moment I coughed up blood, more followed, spilling across the wooden floor in dark, uneven streaks. But even as the taste of iron filled my mouth, I knew this was only the beginning. Sharp, thin tendrils burst from my body in every direction, writhing violently as if desperate to escape from me. And no, ignoring the pain, I focused everything on them. I took deep breaths, focusing my mind and trying my best to control the mana in the air to collect the tendrils. Having just shattered my domain, this was the necessary step I needed to take to ensure that the domain wouldn't be gone forever, and I dropped in strength. The process was extremely difficult, and most people tended to fail in this regard. However, thankfully, my mind was stronger than most. Given my current control over my emotive magic, I was able to pick up each tendril without any mistake. The process was exhausting, but I remained precise. By the time I finally contained the last tendril, I could feel that none of my former strength had slipped away. Ha! It was only then that I took a deep breath and leaned back against the floor. I did it. I had shattered the last pieces of Julian's integrated domain. With this done, I could now focus on creating my own. This process was just as hard, but I already had a pretty good idea of how to proceed. In fact, I had already done this process once before. Let's try. Recovering my mana and stamina, I sat back up and immediately got to work. Having collected all the tendrils and integrated them back into my body, the cursed domain that had existed previously returned, and alongside my own domain I still had two domains. The next couple of steps were going to be even more difficult. I needed to shatter both of my domains. That meant that I had to experience the same thing twice. Who? Taking in a nervous breath, I closed my eyes once more and focused my attention on my two domains. Orbs appeared in all directions, alongside hands. They were everywhere, floating in the darkness around. As I took in the sight, the hands lunged forward, grasping greedily at each glowing orb that shimmered in the air. Fusion. This was the first step that I needed to take. I needed to fuse my two domains. This process wasn't entirely difficult. As the hands shot out and grabbed each orb, they began to change color. Certain arms lengthened, some grew smaller, and some enlarged. The process was quick, and aside from a few other changes, there were no noticeable changes. Taking in the sight around me, I got to work. Break. The next step was to break the domain. Zero crack. Once more, the world trembled. The pain was even more intense than before, leaving me completely breathless. I know. I promised myself not to suffer as much, but I don't really have a choice in this regard. If I don't do this, I don't think I'll ever be able to integrate my domains. Sweat started to pour from the side of my face as I struggled to maintain my expression, my face crumbling with the pain that came with the shattering process. Crack. The sound rang through my head. Irk. My body bent forward, another mouthful of blood spilling out. My arms trembled as the world around me began to shake. This pain was worse. Far worse. Every nerve in my body burned, my vision flickering as mana spiraled out of control. It felt like my skin was being peeled off from the inside, like something alive was clawing its way out of me. The air distorted. The hands began to crack. Small at first, but the cracks spread quickly until the whole space was filled with light and trembling fragments. Ha! Ha ha! I could barely breathe. It was too much to handle, but if I stopped now, everything would have been for nothing. Bang! 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 One after another, the hands shattered, breaking apart into thousands of glowing particles that drifted gently through the air. The backlash nearly split my mind in half. The domain resisted, twisting and pulling apart. It didn't want to break. Every time I tried to shatter a hand, I'd feel a certain sense of resistance. My blood felt hot, boiling as I forced the process forward. Come on! My jaw clenched. My eyes burned. The veins in my neck felt like they were about to burst. I pushed harder. The air screamed as hands shattered one after another, and I felt something inside me snap. A cold rush swept through my chest, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, bang! The world shattered again. Uck! My body hit the ground, limbs shaking uncontrollably. My breath came in short, uneven bursts as I stared blankly at the ceiling. I couldn't move. All I could feel was the faint, unstable mana swirling inside my chest. Felt strange, unfamiliar, but mine. A weak smile spread across my face as I stared at the colorful tendrils that were floating in my vision. I did it. I had shattered my domain. Now all that was left was for me to integrate my domain. The last step to truly reach the 8th tier. Chapter 803. Integrating Domain 2. Ugh. Despite the pain, I knew that I couldn't relax. There was still one last step. The hardest step had been completed. All I needed to do now was collect everything that was leaking and merge it into a vessel. I already knew what I wanted to merge my domain into. Taking a slow, steady breath, I looked down at the countless tendrils of varying colors writhing as they emerged from my body, each one pulsing faintly with its own strange light. Controlling the mana in the air, I collected each tendril and had them move towards my hands as a faint image appeared in my mind. It was that of a book. Indeed, this was the vessel that I had chosen. A book. There were many others that I had in mind, but this one felt the most fitting, especially when I recalled my fight back at the right. This felt like the most ideal form for my integrated domain, and since my mind was already set up, it didn't take long for the outline of the book to appear in my grasp as the tendrils all started to move towards it, a faint glow spreading across the room. While the process was no longer difficult, it was still rather tedious. I had to connect each tendril to the outline of the vessel in my grasp, adding them one by one without losing concentration. It was a slow, tedious process that lasted several hours. Drip, drip. As sweat dripped onto the wooden floor, I remained seated, staring at the tangible book that rested right above my legs. Almost there. Only a few tendrils remained as I guided each toward the book, its glow intensifying with every connection. The faint outline solidified, and slowly, the finer details began to take shape before my eyes. A golden cover took form soon after, its surface adorned with countless tiny orbs of different colors, blue, pink, violet, and more, each one pulsing softly. They circled a massive black orb set at the center, their hues shifting and blending in a slow, mesmerizing rhythm. A connection formed between the book and me, and the moment the final tendril fused with it, the glow began to fade. The light dimmed completely, and I felt the book's weight grow solid and real in my hand, pressing firmly against my palm. I sat in silence, staring at the book in my grasp for a couple of seconds before slumping back onto the ground, my breath extremely heavy. It's over. I looked around me. The floor was still stained with blood, though much of it had dried by now. I wanted to clean it, but I was too exhausted. I could hardly lift up a finger, my entire arm shaking. But still, I did it. Staring at the book in my hands, I felt an undeniable excitement. I had been delaying it for quite some time, but I had now fully integrated my own domain into a vessel. It was safe to say that I was now a full-fledged 8th tier. All that was left for me to do was to reach the 6th level of emotive magic. But this level, I'm still quite far from it. This was a level few had ever reached, and I had no idea where to begin. There were no records, no guidance, nothing to look back on. From this point onward, I would have to carve my own path and uncover the secrets of this new realm on my own. But would it be enough? Would it be enough for me to become the 8th god? I don't know, but I don't really have a choice but to try. It was true that I was far from reaching the 6th level, but it was also true that I was way ahead of most people, especially after absorbing the ball of resentment that came from Julian. In fact, I had yet to digest those emotions fully. They were still lingering within my body, waiting to be absorbed fully. Perhaps I might find something once I fully absorb those emotions. For now, I'll take things slowly. I have no choice but to take things slowly. The plan for now was to find Noelle and Delilah. I was quite worried about the safety of both. But still, there was something else that was bothering. Advent of the 3 calamities. Indeed, it was time for me to think about those 3. It didn't seem like Panthea was aware of the fact that those 3 were the calamities, but what was I supposed to do now? Given what she's told me, they're going to be incredibly dangerous in the future. In fact, they might be the reason why a second mirror dimension might form. How should I handle this? I wanted to tell them this, but I needed to be careful about this information. If what Panthea said was true, then they were connected to the outer beings. I couldn't afford to let them realize that I knew. But then again, I had told them quite a bit about myself. Ugh! I ruffled my hair in annoyance. This situation, it was quite annoying. In the end, I never got to tell them. I decided to observe them for a little longer to determine whether it was safe to share this information with them. Given the nature of the information, I couldn't afford to take any risks. The days passed like that, and without anyone or anything stopping us on our journey, we were able to reach the borders of the Chlora domain rather quickly. Soon, we were going to leave the land of light. BRRR. I held my arms tightly, staring out into the distance. All that stretched before me was the endless sea, yet the change in the weather was unmistakable. It was growing colder with each passing day. What are you doing? Leon arrived next to me, giving me a weird look. You do know that you can coat your body with mana to protect yourself from the cold? I know. Then? I'm just trying to get a feel of the cold. It's been hot and dry for so long. The weather in the mirror dimension was extreme. There was no such thing as pleasant weather here. It was always extreme one way or the other. The chill I felt now was no exception. It may look like it wasn't affecting me much, but the temperature was in the negative degrees. How long do you think it will take for us to arrive? Leon suddenly asked, staring towards the distance as a certain fog began to appear. I mused for a moment before answering. It should take around a couple of hours. We're nearly there, but that's not the main problem. You're talking about those from the Temple of Light? Yes. I gave a brief nod. Although they've yet to make themselves appear, I can pretty much feel their presence. They're watching our every movement, and I suspect that it won't be long until they finally start to make their move. Leon's expression darkened at the thought, his body visibly tensing. Do you think we have a shot if we fight them? Nope. This much was clear. The living saint alone could probably wipe the floor with us, and that was in spite of me finally integrating my own domain. Nevertheless, that didn't mean that things were actually hopeless. In fact, I didn't think I would have to worry about the living saint. If my prediction is correct, Panthea will likely make her move soon. She'll probably act the moment they begin their assault. She wouldn't want the living saint fighting alongside the others. In that sense, she's probably expecting us to deal with a few of the seats ourselves so that the burden on her is lower. That shouldn't be too much of a problem. Everyone present was fairly strong. Leon, Aoife, Kira, and Evelyn could all handle a Tier 8 user. They might not necessarily win, but if they grouped up in pairs, it was possible. Leon could handle one alone, and so could N. The same was for me. In that regard, this situation wasn't extremely dire. The only issue was that all of this was just speculation on my part. I had no way of knowing whether Panthea truly intended to deal with them. Still, even if she didn't, I had a few plans of my own to fall back on. I didn't waste the past several weeks doing nothing. Her. All of a sudden, a soft laugh caught my attention. When I looked down, I saw a little girl gazing up at me. A faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips. The hell? I was all too familiar with this little girl. What are you doing out here? Aoife, let me out. This little girl. She had changed since the last time I had seen her. She was still a little girl, but she grew much more spiteful. I don't know what has happened in the time that I was gone, but it almost feels like she's been trained by Kira or something like that. She was just weird. Her. And that laugh of hers, it was really creeping me out. You want to watch some TV? TV. Teresa looked at me strangely, shaking her head at the same time. I'm too grown for that stuff. I don't need to watch it. Oh, then do you need anything? Shake. The little girl shook her head. Staring at her, I grew speechless. I was just about to follow up when I suddenly felt something, and my head turned towards a certain direction. As if also sensing what I was sensing, Leon turned his head towards the distance, and my heart sank. That's faster than I expected. Yeah. Turning my attention back towards Teresa, I spoke. Tell Aoife and the others to get here quickly. We're about to have a group exercise. Yeah. Group exercise. Extending my hand, a book appeared in my grasp as I pursed my lips and looked towards the distance once more. I hope my previous guess was correct. Chapter 804. Outer Skirt Fight. A man sat in silence, his entire body shrouded in a thin light that seemed to glow with an ethereal aura. He sat without making any sound, his expression calm and collected. A thin glow appeared beneath him, shrouding him in the light as his entire body radiated warmth. He looked flawless, and soon, they've neared the edge. The living saint opened his eyes, revealing a pair of deep yellow pupils that shimmered faintly in the dim light of the hexagonal chamber. He turned back to see several figures standing behind him. His lips curled into a smile. I take it that all of you are in favor of the change? None of the people replied, but their silence spoke volumes. The living saint's smile grew. In that case, let's head out. In actuality, he understood that not all of them believed in him. A few were still loyal followers of Panthea, and this was understandable. Having been brainwashed since their youth to believe her, it was only natural that they were extremely loyal to her. He wasn't much different, and there used to be a time when he never would have believed he would have ever betrayed her. However, things were now different. His eyes had been opened, and he could now see that such loyalty was meaningless. He also understood that they were all used by the goddess. She was merely using them as tools in order to increase her power. They were nothing but pawns to her. The realization had truly opened up his eyes to the world. Follow me. Standing up, he closed his eyes and locked points with the seat that had been closely following the ship where the goddess was located. Once he had a good idea of the location, his hand began to vibrate as the space before him rippled. World integration. That was the phase one would reach once reaching the zenith. It was a state of complete dominance over the mana in the air, from its countless affinities that were contained within mana itself, to the very way it flowed and moved. In that state, the user no longer needed to worry about their own mana at all. One could argue that the moment someone reached the zenith, they'd have infinite mana. But it would be more accurate to say that their mana pool was the same as that of the mana that drifted inside the world. The living saint had yet to reach the zenith, but as someone who was close to reaching such a state, he had reached the point where he had absolute control over the mana that drifted in the air. It was with such control that he became capable of handling all affinities. And of such affinity, the space affinity was included. Re-yip. As if the very air before him had turned solid. His hand gripped the space itself and tore it open. The air split apart like fabric, revealing a swirling portal that pulsed with energy, its depths connecting directly to the source he was bound to. He turned his attention back to the seats. Please enter. Our guests should be waiting for us on the other SI. The living saint suddenly stopped, his gaze drifting towards a different direction. As if realization finally dawned on him, he lowered his head and chuckled. So you knew all along. His words brought confusion to several people, but the living saint didn't elaborate, turning his attention towards the seats. Not all seats were equal. To be a seat, one needed to be either a luminarch or a solarch. The ranks were based on contributions and strength, with the solarch mainly composed of those who were ranked at around the 9th tier. There were only 5 said individuals within the church, the living saint included. The number of luminarchs was much higher. There were about 9. Gazing at the 4 other solarchs, the living saint eventually commanded 3 of them. "You 4 come with me." He then looked at the luminarchs. "Handle the remaining." Eventually, his gaze fell on the last solarch. Dressed in a red robe, the solarch emitted a terrifying power. The living saint gave him a good look before nudging towards the portal. "Keep the portal steady. They should be able to handle them, but if something happens, feel free to interfere. I do not need any prisoners. Do your best at eliminating them. We don't want any variables." "Understood," the solarch replied, his voice deep. "Good," the living saint replied, his gaze drifting towards the distance once more. It wasn't long until his body faded completely, appearing in an entirely different space. The place was neither too close nor too far from the city. It was in what appeared to be an old abandoned church on top of a hill, its dark stone walls weathered and cracked, the wooden doors half-hanging from rusted hinges. The waves roared beneath as faint droplets of red spread into the air. The living saint stood by the entrance of the church, gazing inward as light spilled quietly through the red-stained glass at the far end, bathing the altar below in a muted crimson glow. Staring at the scene, the living saint opened his mouth. "How long?" His voice echoed quietly throughout the space, his entire body radiating a certain pressure as he kept his gaze focused on the altar. Splash! Splash! The waves continued to roar beneath, splashing the world in crimson as a figure appeared in the middle of the altar not long after, her eyes flickering with a certain intensity as she looked at him calmly. "Oh dear, it's been quite a while, really. You were never really good at hiding your intentions. Is that so? And here I thought I was doing a very good job at it." "Ha!" Panthea smiled, shaking her head quietly. "My child, I've lived for far longer than you can possibly fathom. I've seen all that there is to see within this world. There's no way I could have ever seen it coming. You've underestimated me, or the old gods that currently reside within this world." For a moment, the calmness that lingered around her body faded as the flames in her eyes flickered with a certain intensity. "We may no longer be at our primes, but we're not beings that can be underestimated. You look down on us a little too much." Swoosh! 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 3 figures appeared behind the living saint not long after, and as Panthea stared at them, the flames within her eyes flickered and her smile turned even more serene. "Very well." She closed her eyes, the world turning silent. No one made a move, and then, her eyes opened again. The moment she did, the world was blinded by light. "What's going on? Why did you tell us to come here? Is something happening?" "Ugh!" Aoife, Evelyn, and Anaz and Leon all stood by the dock. Looking back, it didn't seem like the girls had yet noticed the abnormality in the air, but it didn't take long for them to take notice, as their expressions turned extremely serious. "Space fissure. It's spreading." The atmosphere turned incredibly tense. All eyes were fixed on the distance, and a heartbeat later, a thin crack began to form in the air. The crack expanded quietly, and it wasn't long before several figures walked out from it. The moment they did, the entire world appeared to come to a stop. All the sea life that resided beneath the ship fled while the ship stopped moving altogether as the waves started to rock back and forth, growing in size with each passing second. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, and as I held onto the book in my hand, a certain gaze attracted my attention. "Ha!" I almost smirked. "That bald head. He really must hate me quite a bit, huh? If looks could kill, I'd have been dead 20 times over by now." One glance at him was enough to show just how much he despised me. But even as his eyes burned into me, I didn't feel afraid. Rather, this is pretty exciting. Having just reached the 8th tier, I wanted nothing more than to test my current powers. In particular, my integrated domain. I wanted to see to what extent I could use it. But there was something that was bothering me. Staring at the numerous people standing before us, my heart sank a little. We were outnumbered by quite a bit, and the strength of the people in front of us was also a little bit higher. I turned my attention towards Aoife, Kira, and Evelyn. The 3 were the weakest of the group. They had all yet to reach the 8th tier, and while they could probably last a little bit against them, in no way did I believe that they could beat them. As if reading my thoughts, Aoife looked at me. Her gaze flickered with a certain coldness that caused me to pause. "Worry about yourself. We're no longer the same as we were in the past. None of us wasted time during the 3 years that we were gone." Her red hair suddenly began to flutter, and her expression turned so cold that she looked like a completely different person. "Hum, hum, hum." A loud humming sound echoed from her waist, and not long after, silver streaks shot out into the air as they revealed themselves into a series of different swords, each one floating perfectly around her. She wasn't the only one to change. Kira's entire body turned completely dark, her body fading completely from sight as several dark films appeared beneath all of our feet. Already familiar with what she was doing, I looked at the black film silence before eventually looking at Evelyn. She stood quietly, her hair normal and her expression calm. It didn't look like she had changed at all, but upon closer look. Zere crack. Zere crack. A faint, yet unmistakable, muffled cracking reverberated from deep within her body. The sound grew progressively stronger with each passing second until it started to become harder to ignore. I felt a terrifying energy rising up from deep within her body, enough to make me shudder a little, especially since it felt as though her power was continuously growing. What sort of skill is this? My mind shook. The girls, they had grown so much stronger than I had last remembered. Despite being stronger than them, I still felt quite a bit threatened by what they were displaying. And as I held onto the book in my grasp, I took a deep breath, locking eyes with the bald man from before. The sequences of events had all occurred in a matter of seconds, and so by the time I turned my attention towards the seats, they all started to move. I grasped the book tightly as it suddenly started to glow. This was going to be my first fight since coming into the future. I wanted to see just how much I had changed. Chapter 805. Outer Skirt Fight 2. Could he walk on air? Nope. Julian was still not strong enough to do that. Only when one became strong enough to reach the 9th tier would they be able to walk on air, as they gradually gained absolute control over the mana in the air. The most he could do was walk on water. The same didn't appear to be true for the others, as a couple of swords appeared beneath Aoife's feet as she casually stepped on them and lifted off the ground. Farah. Well, Sage. Wait. Julian looked at Aoife once more and had a sudden thought. I might not be able to have fine control like her, but I should still be able to use a form of telekinesis. It was certainly a thought worth entertaining, but he didn't really have time to think it through properly as the people above started to move. Swoosh! A heavy whistling sound tore through the air, and the burly man from before dashed toward him rapidly. Watch out! A shout followed the attack, and right as he was about to react, Julian's entire body was shrouded in darkness. By the time he realized it, he was standing on top of the water. The same was true for the others, each one appearing one after another in a different part of the sea, far away from the ship. Kira appeared a moment later, her breath a little ragged. Focus your attention on someone. Don't fight near the ship. She disappeared shortly after that, appearing before another figure as her entire body was shrouded in darkness. Julian only managed to look at her once before the air split again, and that same sharp whistling filled the space. Turning his head, he nearly cursed as the bald man from before appeared just a few meters away from him. Despite the abruptness of the situation, he didn't panic. Holding onto the book in his mind, he mumbled, "Blindness. Death." The man's movements slowed for a moment, his eyes turning white for just a couple of seconds. In spite of this, his direction and speed didn't change. He continued to charge at Julian, but it was precisely his blindness and deafness that gave Julian time to react and move away. Bang! The water splashed in all directions, large waves forming as the burly man dove into the water. Julian hastily turned around, shifting his attention toward the direction of the splash. Judging from how fast he attacked and the strength, he's most likely a body user. I need to be careful in close quarters. I might be able to fight back, but I don't think I'll be able to win in that aspect. His eyes sharpened as he looked around. The waves that had spread soon began to settle until the sea returned to its calm. Given that the water was different from the normal water in the outer world, it calmed down in just a few seconds. A strange silence followed as he glanced around, tense and alert, and as he clutched the book tightly, something stirred beneath him. Splash! A large hand emerged, reaching for his ankle. Julian looked down, the book in his hand glowing. Several red hands emerged, each one diving down and smashing against the hand. The move was predictable. Crack, crack, crack. The hands shattered quickly under the weight of the fist, but it wasn't like he didn't expect that. All Julian wanted the hands to do was stop their momentum, and that was exactly what happened as they slowed significantly. Fear, blindness, death, sadness, both emotive and curse magic. He used a combination of both to bring the hand to a complete halt. Without wasting a moment, Julian reached down, his hand turning a deep shade of green as he grasped the one beneath him and pulled it up. Splash! The water exploded outward, a pale figure emerging, his white eyes clearing as he stared at Julian with an expression of horror. You! Julian didn't waste a second, a red orb appearing in his mind as he kicked straight toward the man's abdomen. Bang! Hugh Imp! The man's body shot back, skidding across the water. Julian didn't follow up instead. He looked to his right and left, where two other figures had appeared. Overall, only about half a minute had elapsed since the start of the fight. The entire sequence of events had been incredibly quick. They had been rushing him since the start, but by the time they reached him, he had already managed to gain the upper hand against the bald man, leaving them stunned. Julian was similarly stunned. Are they weak? Or am I just that much stronger than before? He didn't think it was the former, but now that he thought about it, he had always, in some way, found a way to handicap himself in battle. This was one of the rare times he hadn't, and the result was obvious. Tapping onto the water, his vision changed. Multiple orbs appeared in his sight, purple and red. These were the primary colors he could see. In particular, the red orb that appeared in the distance. Bang! A gigantic geyser shot into the air, a figure hurtling toward him a moment later at full speed. Arg! The other two began to move as well, their motions slower this time, faint magic circles forming in the air around them. Several items appeared in their hands as they prepared to act, but Julian didn't give them the chance. Eyes of existence. Huh! What's? The mana within his body drained rapidly, but at that exact moment, everything came to a halt. The two beside him froze, and the bald man hurtling toward him began to lose all his momentum. Julian smiled at the sight, snapping his fingers as the numerous tags he had attached to the man's body burst at once. Anger. 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 Ach! The red orb within the man's body quadrupled in size, his mouth letting out a raw shout. Julian didn't stop. Blindness. 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 Deaf. 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 The mana continued to drain from inside him, but he had plenty to spare. With the book in hand, he was far more efficient than in the past. The eyes of everyone present turned white, and as the burly man looked around, he immediately set his sights on the person next to him. Hiya! A scream ripped out of his lungs. He lunged in their direction. Wait! It was too late. Bang! A fist came smashing against one of the seats. Because of their momentary blindness and deafness, they weren't able to block the attack. Aak! A scream ripped across the air, the seat smashing against the water. Julian stared at all of this without moving at all, the book in his hand glowing a red hue. Anger, he mumbled, his gaze focused on the seat that had fallen. The red orb within their body expanding as they rushed out of the water and attacked the bald man that seemed to have lost all rationality. Bang! Bang! The surroundings quivered. Magic circles formed. Stop! Estiek! Blindness, anger, deaf, anger, deaf, blindness. The book in Julian's hand changed color with each emotion or curse he used, thin threads of different colors latching onto the three as they started to lose all sense of reasoning. He had long since stopped using eyes of existence, yet the three continued to attack each other, their entire bodies made of red. Ach! Arg! I'll kill you! Screams tore through the air as attacks rained down, each person turning on the other with ruthless intent, desperate to kill before being killed. Julian stood not far from them, staring at the scene with a book in his hand, his expression looking extremely calm. The sight before him, it was all orchestrated by him. He was like a puppeteer, controlling his dolls as they desperately fought each other. Whenever one of them began to regain their composure, he would whisper, "Anger," sending them spiraling back into another frenzy. A thin smile spread across his lips as he stared at the sight, and for a moment, he allowed himself to look away. He wanted to see how the others were faring. However, the moment he did, his expression changed. This, as opposed to the struggle he had expected, Aoife, Kira, Leon, and Evelyn all looked to be holding well against their own opponents. The sight left Julian stunned. None of the girls appeared to be struggling at all, with them even holding the upper hand. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Aoife stood calmly in the air, a sword beneath her foot as multiple swords gravitated around her. Teresa stood on her shoulder, her face pulled into a smirk as she mumbled, her, before she pointed at the swords and they caught fire. Aoife pushed her hand down, and the swords all dashed towards her opponent. Her attacks were suffocating, coming from all directions and leaving her opponent with no room to breathe. But the creepiest aspect wasn't the way that she fought, but the thin black veins that pulsed in her face as she fought. The more they pulsed, the colder Aoife's face appeared to be as her attacks became more ruthless and precise. Siare Croc. A thunderclap roared a moment later, catching Julian's attention as Evelyn rushed towards her opponent. Her entire body bathed in lightning, her rumbling growing incredibly loud. Bang! Each one of her movements forced out a thunderclap as several dozen magic circles formed around her, causing the air to grow static. Siare. Kreaake. With each thunderclap, the pressure coming out of her body grew noticeably stronger. Bang! The one who seemed to have it the easiest was Kira, her body merging with the darkness and appearing in every direction, slowly and steadily injuring her opponent with shallow cuts and attacks. She wasn't as loud or as fancy as the other two, but she was incredibly efficient. Leon was not much different, but unlike them, he was quite captivating, with flawless swordsmanship and eyes as dark as they could be, as he simply overpowered his opponent. Bang! Bang! Sparks flew in the air as the opponent tried to resist, but it was of no use. Leon was simply overpowering them, and as Julian caught sight of everything, he found himself unable to react. They really weren't lying. They've really grown a lot stronger than before, and not by a little bit. Each one appeared to be holding well against opponents that were supposed to be stronger than them. Of course, the black veins on Aoife's face were concerning, and most likely the main reason for her strength, but it was still impressive. But that was until, a certain voice whispered in the air, bringing the entire place to a freezing halt. What a mess! Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.